Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Yumiko Nakagawa, one of the pastors here at Wellspring. And today we are continuing our summer sermon series on a sacred rhythm. We've been doing this for a while, and today's focus is Sabbath, which I think is quite appropriate because Pastor Rebecca is on sabbatical, as we have mentioned a couple of times this summer. And a sabbatical usually means a stepping away from or kind of taking break from their regular life, right, including work. Depending on your profession, it could be a couple months of kind of you stepping away from your regular rhythm. I know in academia, often granted 1 year. And it's a little bit different from vacation because you really, point is you stepping away and trying something else. And of course, not everyone gets to take sabbatical, right? Like if you are, in a regular job, you don't usually get to step away for a couple months. But the weekly rhythm of Sabbath, a sabbatical is a form of Sabbath, but weekly rhythm Sabbath, that's something available for all of us. So I think it's good for us to kind of revisit, look at this idea of Sabbath today in the Bible and see where is it written and really learn about what the Sabbath is about. And I have to tell you, I am very, very excited to talk about Sabbath. Oftentimes when I up here and I start, I'm like, I'm not good at this. I'm actually still figuring this and that. And, I kind of bring less excitement, I feel like. But this one, Sabbath, I can talk about. There are three topics, field or topics that I can preach in a heartbeat with lots of excitement. One is Book of Ruth. I think you all know I love Book of Ruth. I can preach about that anytime, anywhere. So Book of Ruth, Sabbath is second topic that I can talk about anytime, and money. Those three, anytime, anywhere. Just ask me and I'm ready. Those are really exciting topic for me. Sabbath is something that I really see the value deeply from a theological and biblical perspective. But it's also something that I lived, and it's really life-giving. I've had the regular rhythm of Sabbath for so many years, and honestly, I think that's what got me through. And when I was in Boston in ministry, one of my hardest years in ministry, in life really, I think what got me through is the rhythm of Sabbath. So clearly, I'm excited. I'm ready to talk. You guys may never leave today, but I know that's not where everyone is, right? Some of you hear this and then, Sabbath. Oh yeah, I've heard that. I know what it is, but some people feel like that's a foreign concept. That's not something you do regularly, or maybe something that you don't kind of feel like you don't want to talk about. At least for this person, I have this wonderful sister in Christ, and she gave me permission to talk about her as long as I don't mention her name. So she's someone I respect deeply. I like her, but her faith is so genuine, right? It's like she follows Jesus in every aspect of her life. She serves above and beyond. She forgives unforgivable people. I don't know how she does this. And she loves people that I'm like, I don't know how you even try to love this person. And she still does because Jesus did this. So she does follow Jesus. And she's really an inspiring role model for me as a follower of Christ. And, she's also one of those people who's good at everything and anything, right? So one day, but she told me that she's actually really bad at Sabbath. And I'm listening, I was like, what? I didn't know you're bad at anything. I thought you were good at just everything. So I was kind of shocked, but she shared how she was reading Exodus and Genesis and read about Sabbath, and she was feeling a little bad because she doesn't practice Sabbath regularly. She said, I'm not good at it. And honestly, it's totally understandable if you've known her. She has this demanding jobs. Yes, plural. She has jobs, multiple jobs, and each of them very demanding jobs. And she takes care of her family and her friends all the time. She's always doing something. I don't feel like I really heard her resting. I don't even know she sleeps sometimes. I'm like, I don't think it's humanly possible for you to do everything and also sleep. So she's just, very busy person. So, of course, Sabbath is something that maybe that's really hard for her to incorporate in her life. And then I don't think she's alone in this, especially here in Hawaii, right? Many of you come from families or cultures that deeply values work. Right? You and your generation, your family are where you are in life because of maybe your family's hard work, previous generations and generations of just working hard. And taking break is something that you think about later. You work hard all the time. For people who come from that value, Sabbath may seem kind of disconnected from your values and your practice, kind of how you live your life. So maybe, Sabbath is something that you kind of avoid talking about. Sabbath is something that you don't practice. Some people really love Sabbath, but that's very exciting. I don't think it's everyone. Wherever you are, though, I think it is really worth revisiting the idea of Sabbath today. So that we see Sabbath not so much as obligation, but maybe as a gift to receive. So let me start not with what we should do, but with what God did in the Sabbath. Before Sabbath was a command or a practice, it was a part of very beginning. In the beginning, there was Sabbath. Before there were rules and religion, the Sabbath was not an obligation. The Sabbath was a rhythm of joy, woven into the fabric of creation, just the pattern of creation. That all began on the seventh day, because something holy, something special happened that day. Let me read from Genesis chapter 2, 1 through 3. The scripture is on the slides. Also, you can look up, if you don't have a bulletin, you can look up as well. Genesis 2, 1 through 3. That's the very first book of the Bible. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God finished the work God had been doing. So on the seventh day, God rested from all God's work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it, God rested from all the work of creating that God had done. This is the word of God that we give thanks to, and we're so excited to dive into this. So Genesis 2 is what I read. Chapter before that is Genesis 1. And Genesis 1 describes the day 1 through 6 of creation narrative. And in the passage I just read, which is the day 7 on Genesis 2, we see a couple things. First of all, day 7 is special. In the first chapter of Genesis 1, where it describes the day 1 to day 6, we see a pattern, very clear pattern. Each day begins with God's words following creation. Followed by God said, and God creates something by speaking. And after that ends with there was evening and morning, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. That repeats. But day 7 breaks that pattern. The familiar pattern of God said creation, there was evening and morning, day 7, is not in there, right? God doesn't speak to create. Something is different about that day. Day 7 is special. It's a special day in the creation narrative. Okay, so day 7, God didn't speak to create. There was no evening and morning and then the day 7. Okay, so if God didn't speak to create, what did God do on that day? What did God do? It's written in Genesis 2. God stopped all God's work. God rested. God stopped and rested, not because God was tired, I don't think, but because everything was completed. Right? God stopped and rested because everything was completed. And there is another thing God did. God blessed. And God blessed the seventh day and made it sacred. God blessed. That meaning God delighted immensely. God enjoyed what God created. God enjoyed everything about this seventh day, blessed. Because everything about that day and time was special. And God made it sacred, said this time, this day, seventh day, this is special, different from all the other days. From day 1 to day 6 was special, but this one, something else. The seventh day, it was a moment of joy and presence, which God blessed and made it sacred. And isn't it interesting? The very first thing God declares sacred, holy, is not a place. When we hear sacred or holy, we think about a place, mountain, temple, city, right? But very first thing God said, this is something else set apart, a holy, special, is time. And it's not just a time, right? This time is the time that God got to spend with God's creation. Time shared between creator and creation. That is what's special. See, the Sabbath was a significant part of the original creation rhythm and not something added later. The seventh day wasn't a cool down or respite after the hard work of creation. It was the moment that God began to dwell, live, and be present, interact, and enjoy the space and time with the creation. Sabbath began not because of the fatigue, but because the rhythm of joy was created. A holy day, not because of the rest, but because of what the rest allow for us, which is a shared time with the creation. And this shared time between God and the creator God and creation, that actually is the purpose, right? Is a purpose of creation that God gets to enjoy. God and the creation together dwell in joy and delight. And the Sabbath, that first Sabbath was exactly that, the day that God and creation get to dwell together in delight and joy. All wonderful. But of course, the story doesn't end there, right? The first Sabbath didn't last forever. Of course, shortly after, Adam and Eve committed sin that drove them out from the Garden of Eden, and their descendants ended up being a slave in Egypt. But even then, God didn't abandon this idea of rhythm, of shared time with the creation. So God reintroduced the idea, this time not just as a shared rhythm, but as a gift. And that's what we see in Exodus 20, verse 8 to 11. In Exodus 20, God gives the Sabbath as one of the commandments of the 10 commandments at Mount Sinai after delivering all this God's people from Egypt out of slavery. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in the 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. See, Sabbath was given to God's people to remind them that you are no longer slaves. You're not defined by what you produce. You do not have to live by someone else's schedule anymore. You are people of God, created in God's image and are called to live as God, the Holy Trinity, lived. In the rhythm, you are not human doing, you're human being. What God blessed and made it holy on the seventh day, God gave it again to them, right? And this time as a rhythm for God's people to remember who they are, God's people. Very good. But as with many good things in the Bible, Sabbath didn't stay as intended. Right? Over time, Sabbath eventually became a burden to many people. It became all about rules, all about restrictions. So when we look at the Sabbath practices, whether that's from 3,000 years ago or Sabbath practice that people do today, whether that's the Jewish people or some Christians do Sabbath, you may look at that and feel like, oh, it's kind of restrictive. It's a lot of rules and it seems very inconvenient. Especially in our culture, right? Where we value doing what we want, when we want, how we want. I don't care if there's a red light's on, I'm going to cross the street. They cross, right? That's just how we live. It's about what we want, when we want, how we want. So when we live in that culture, just the idea of kind of stopping for an entire day and limiting ourselves to do a certain activities just seems very disconnected, almost maybe absurd. Some Christians do try to observe Sabbath in a different way, and then they focus maybe less about rules, but really focus on rest and stepping away. But sometimes it's hard to do that, so they just end up feeling guilty of like, oh, I failed Sabbath, I'm not a good Christian, whatever they feel. Or like my friend who I mentioned earlier, that, oh, I'm bad at Sabbath. So whether that's the people who took Sabbath seriously 3,000 years ago or people taking Sabbath seriously today, I feel like the Sabbath observance has become more about what to do, what not to do, rather than about what the day is actually for. Somewhere along the way, from the day 7 of the creation to here today, Sabbath stopped feeling like a gift and it became a burden. But I've seen a different kind of Sabbath. I think it's about 20, maybe 30 years ago. Well, 25 years ago-ish, I guess. I got to spend the Sabbath with a nice Jewish family in Jerusalem on a Sabbath day. And I think there were restrictions. Like I think I had to take stairs instead of elevators. I had to careful not to touch the switches in their house. But when I was trying to remember this, honestly, I had a hard time remembering the rules and the restrictions and inconvenience that came with it. Because what I remember most about that day is the joy. It was a Shabbat dinner, and it's kind of around the table, about 15 of us, big family, and then they kind of invited me and my friend. So we all sat around. It's a table full of food and like drinks, and there are lots hours of singing, reading of the text, and laughter and a warmth, and just welcoming people like me. And I didn't, and I don't understand Hebrew, but I understood their joy. Even though I didn't quite understand everything they were saying, I just understood the joy in the table and in the room. And that Sabbath wasn't about restrictions. It wasn't about inconvenience. It was about praise, presence, and joy with each other, which did leave a lasting image for me of what Sabbath could potentially be. So even now when I hear Sabbath in the Bible or people talk about the faces of these people around the table come to my mind and just remember the joy. That night, one night that I spent showed me what the Sabbath doesn't have to be about, restrictions. The Sabbath doesn't have to be distorted. It can be deeply alive, life-giving, and that possibility of living that Sabbath still exists even in the modern days. And that's possible, of course, because of Jesus. Because Jesus saw that when he came here on this earth, he saw the Sabbath was distorted, became a burden. But he didn't see Sabbath as a burden. He didn't see Sabbath as a day of rules. He didn't ignore the Sabbath. He didn't also let it continue to be a burden. He looked at how the Sabbath was practiced. That's not how it should be. So he restored the Sabbath, just like many other things Jesus did. In Luke 13, we see exactly what Jesus did on a Sabbath day, one Sabbath day. One Sabbath day, he was teaching in the synagogues. That's what people did on Sabbath day. Jesus saw this woman who's been bent over for 18 years. He calls her forward, lays hands on her, and she stands up and start praising God. It's the picture of restoration we see in this Luke 13:10-13. And restoration of this woman, not just physically, but as a whole person, she was restored by Jesus. In this moment described in this Luke chapter 13:10-13, Jesus restores two things. One is this woman, right? Jesus corrects what's been bent out of shape, and Jesus restores her to what she was meant to be, a being that praises and being a community. He also lets her stand tall again and God's image bearer, that somebody who bears God's image and not weighed down by burden. He also at that moment restores another thing, which is the Sabbath itself. He corrects what's been out of shape. He restores Sabbath to what it was meant to be. He renews the Sabbath as God's gift, not as a burden. And Jesus wasn't breaking the Sabbath rules. Jesus is not demeaning the Sabbath practices. Jesus is not ignoring the Sabbath. He's showing us what it's meant to be. God's gift, day of restoration. We see that Sabbath here is not just about resting and stopping. It's about restoring what's broken. Sabbath is a time to be made whole. Sabbath is a day of restoration that leads to joy and a praise, and the Creator and creation rejoice together. It's not just about resting and being refreshed and renewed, rejuvenated. That's just what vacation's for, right? And that's a small picture of Sabbath. What Sabbath leads to is restoration. So then, what does the Sabbath could even look like for people like us, right? It obviously looks different to different people. One place, a good place, if you were thinking like, oh, I kind of want to try Sabbath now, then great. If that's you, one place to start, it might be asking, what would allow me to restore what is broken in my life? What would allow me to restore what is broken in my life? And whatever the answer is, might be a good way for you to start doing your Sabbath, which might require you to rest, which might require you to step away from your regular life, but that's not the point, right? The point is, what would allow me to restore what is broken in my life? For example, one example is this nice Swedish people about 140 years ago, this group, many Swedish people came to the United States. For them, Sabbath was Sunday spent like a big family, gathered in a big house, just like back home. Most of the Swedish immigrants back then were single men and women who left their parents and cousins and siblings back home, and they just came here to work hours and work in farms, long hours, farms, factories, houses during the week. So they kind of on their own working what I guess the Swedish immigrants would do back then. But on Sundays, all these Swedish immigrants working at different places gather together in this one big house. They share a meal, they worship together, open the Bible, read it together as they would have read back home in Swedish, and asking questions, where's it written? How goes your walk? And they just have fellowship together, just like they did back home, worship, being a big family. So for them, Sabbath was Sunday that's restored what they didn't have during the week. That's the culture, language, and a family that they left back in Sweden. And by the way, this group of people who are later became a former group called Mission Friends, and that became a denomination that's us. Evangelical Covenant Church came from this group of people who used to just gather together on Sunday and living out as a family. So that became Mission Friends and became two different denominations. One is Evangelical Covenant Church, which we're part of. Another group that came out from Mission Friends, Evangelical Free Church, which like churches like Kalihi Union Church is a part of. So we're branches from the same roots. Anyway, side note, going back, another example. I really like that story. That's the origin of our denomination. Anyway, for me, back in the time that when I was in Boston, I said earlier I had a very good regular rhythm of Sabbath. What did I do that time? I would, on Mondays, that was my Sabbath day. On Monday, I would go to see my Japanese speaking therapist. If I have an appointment with her, then I'll go talk to her and speak in Japanese, and then I'll go to Japanese. If I don't have an appointment with her, I go to a Japanese grocery stores, not really to buy things because things are expensive in Boston. So I just walk around listening to people speaking Japanese, following Japanese families, they talking. I was like, oh, nice. They like Japanese people here. Enjoy that. Go home and read Japanese books and watch all the Japanese things. It's Monday just became a day that I soak myself in Japanese because 6 days a week, I didn't get to speak Japanese with anyone at work and friends. So that's my Japanese day. And that helped me restore, right? The parts of me that was kind of silenced or really maybe overlooked and worn out and worn down during the week. So it looks different. Maybe it just means that you just spend time with your family. Maybe you just listen to whatever Japanese or whatever language you want to listen to. But what does it look like for you personally? What could it look like? What would allow you to restore what's broken, what's silenced, what's worn down during the week? Maybe it's returning to what you love but you don't get to do. Maybe you love music but you are not professional musicians, so you don't get to play. Then maybe that's something you do to really embrace God's given gift. Maybe for you, who needs to be restored physically, maybe it's just sleeping through without an alarm. You just sleep. Isn't that wonderful for parents who never get to do that? Someday I think you guys get to do that too. But maybe you don't set an alarm, you go to bed, you just wake up when you wake up, and maybe that's what your body needs. Or maybe for those who feel just during the week, you just see ugly side of people all the time. You lost trust and confidence in humanity. Maybe you do something to restore the faith in God's creation, people. Maybe it's reconnecting your roots, right? Maybe Sabbath is a day you cook what your grandma used to cook, or learn to dance, or listen to stories that have shaped your people for generations. Whether your roots are Filipino, Hawaiian, Samoan, Korean, Portuguese, Chinese, Japanese, Okinawan, or combination of all the above, connecting to your roots maybe and saying that this is a part of God, part of me who God made me, that might be what you do on a Sabbath. Sabbath looks different for different people in the season of who you are, but it should always lead you again to restoration of part of you. And you listening here and thinking, okay, she's really excited about Sabbath. She clearly thought a lot more than I have ever thought in an entire life. Yes, that's true, probably. And you think, I still don't know what I'm supposed to do on this Sabbath day. Understand, in part because I don't think I did a good job guiding you that. But I'll leave you with the first very easy step. If you're sitting here thinking, Sabbath might be a nice idea, I don't know where to start. You don't understand how busy my life is. You don't understand how crazy life is when you have all these things going on. If that's you, maybe the very first step you can do is begin by holding it, right? Think of Sabbath as a gift from God. Hold it. Open it, and you imagine Sabbath is something like this beautiful fruits that you never seen is in this box. It smells amazing, and it looks pretty, but you have never seen these fruits in this gift box. But you see it, and you feel it. You just don't know what to do with it. Am I supposed to peel this or just grab it and eat it? Do I just look at it? Is it edible? I don't know. But start by holding it in your hand. Enjoy the fact that gift of Sabbath has been given to you. the gift of Sabbath that was there in the beginning, in the creation, was given to God's people by God in the desert. The gift of Sabbath that's restored by Jesus is now in your hands. Hold it. Enjoy it. Maybe that means you read Genesis, you think about Sabbath. There are a lot of great books about Sabbath. You just enjoy the Sabbath. Not so much about what do I do with it, but enjoy it. The fact that God has given you this wonderful gift. And that's enough. Because Sabbath is not about what to do or what not to do. Right? It's not about resting. It's not about stopping. It's not about doing certain things. It's about receiving what God has been given to you and holding it in your hands. Because essentially the Sabbath is where God's intent and our response meet. So let us start by holding it in our hands and receive it. Because that holding in your hands, receiving it, even if you don't know what exactly you're supposed to do on a Sabbath, receiving as God's gift, that itself is a response. And I think that's enough